Welcome back with a smiling face. Important note before starting, if you are a fan of audio stories, then our Patreon account is the best platform for you. Join us on Patreon for the best audiobooks ever. Luna's Resurgence. Episode 9. Chapter 55 to 59. Lucinda POV. Nick popped Lucinda on her feet in the bathroom and smiled down at her. Want to shower together? She raised an eyebrow at him and shook her head, watched as he chuckled. No offense taken, he had not been expecting her to say yes, she realized. Nick reached in and turned the shower on for her. Grabbed a towel and left the bathroom, closing the door behind him. Lucinda couldn't help the small smile that touched her lips. They did have a nice fun event, even she had to admit it. It was not just fun for Kyra, she too had found it fun, to be chased by him. Nick was leaning on the balcony outside, when Lucinda came out of the bathroom. He was just wearing that towel he'd taken with him, all his wet clothes already removed. His eyes moved towards her almost the second she stepped out of the bathroom. Had been listening for her, she guessed. Lucinda was still in a towel, no dry clothes in the bathroom for her to change into. He stood and walked across the room, smiled down at her one day. "I'll get you in the shower with me," he teased her as he walked by, then his hand cracked her right on the backside. And he went into the bathroom. "In your dreams," she snorted at him through the closed door and heard him laugh. He had not missed it. It had become her standard response. Lucinda dressed in a pair of jeans and her pink cashmere sweater. It had been laundered and returned to the walk-in. Samantha, she figured. Took the wet and soggy book outside to look at it. The print hadn't been ruined, thankfully. Though it was going to take time to dry. Might have to use a hairdryer on it. It was going to take ages, getting her answers now would take longer. But what else could she do? It had been the only copy in the library that she had seen. Lucinda used part of her towel that was still dry to carefully press the pages dry one at a time till she could have access to the bathroom and the hairdryer. "Why that book?" she heard Nick inquire. When he got out of the shower, he was quite close, she realized. "Curious about something is all," she answered him. "Anything I can help you with?" "Unlikely, Nick. It's nothing to do with you or I, don't worry about it," she said, and tried to reassure him. This was not about her trying to sever her tie to his pack. You didn't need a book for that, going rogue was easy, a simple rejection of the pack, and leaving it would do in that matter. "I'm not worried, Lucinda." He didn't sound it, she thought. "I just thought I might be able to help is all." She turned and looked at him. He was leaning casually on the open door frame, arms folded across his bare chest. The man was still wearing just his towel, his body on full display for her. She averted her eyes away from him. Sometimes he was just too darn hard to look at. What was the goddess thinking, creating a specimen like him? She shook her head slightly. "You enjoy being naked, don't you?" "Yes, I do, in our suite. Actually always slept naked till I found you." His tone was light and teasing. The man couldn't help himself, that was for sure. Got to get him to cut it out. She'd had a nice time with him already today, and with him being practically naked right now, was actually affecting her. She wanted to look at him, to eye him over and see what response she would get. Kyra was chortling in her mind. "Do it. I bet we'll end up in the bed. Am I hindering your natural sleeping rhythm?" she shot at him, though couldn't for the life of her muster any annoyance or anger, for her tone. He laughed softly. "Oh, I'm not playing into an argument with you." He seemed to know exactly what she was trying to do. "I'm just asking. I can sleep elsewhere, if it suits you better." Nick walked right over to her and leaned down. She turned away from him quickly, didn't want to be face to face with his naked body. He chuckled softly right in her ear. "Oh no. I like having you in our bed. I can wear pants, till you have your way with me." His arms snaked around her waist and he hugged her gently. His hands touched her bare skin there, set it alight with electric tingles. Lucinda snorted. "My way with you?" "Yes, my dear." His lips brushed her temple in a light kiss. "It's your choice, is it not? So yes, your way with me. I'm certain I'll enjoy watching you seduce me." His voice was deep and husky. Lucinda tried to shove him away. In your dreams her hands were on his hips as she tried to push him away. He was too close and knew he'd be able to hear her heart rate increasing by the second. The longer he stood there wrapped around her, the more she was affected by him. He chuckled against her ear always, his mouth pressed against the skin of her neck softly. She heard him breath in as he kissed her lingeringly just below her ear, softly sucked on her neck. She gasped at the sensation it created, bit down hard on her lip to stop the moan that was trying to escape her lips as pleasure rolled through her from just such a soft thing. His mouth let go a moment later, only to kiss her on the temple again before releasing her completely and walking away. Lucinda turned and watched him go, couldn't help it. She dragged in a deep breath trying to calm her own body and her heart's frantic beating. He'd gone to the walk-in to find clothes. Man loved showing off all his muscles. "We like looking at them." Kyra piped up. Was all she could manage. Averted her eyes very quickly when he turned and looked right at her, a smile on his handsome face. The man knew she was looking at him too. After what he'd done, he probably knew she would be. Could probably feel her eyes on him. Lucinda seemed to always know when he was looking at her, part of their mate bond, she supposed. "I like that he looks at us." Kyra chortled softly. "So do you." "You can't lie to me." She was in a very good mood, Lucinda noted. Her normally grumpy, growly wolf, it seemed, had turned into a happy, playful wolf, since meeting her mate and coming here to his pack. "I like rib." "I know you do." Lucinda shook her head. "Just had to go and bite him, didn't you?" "Funny. Wanted to see what he would do. Lucky he didn't mate you. He's a good wolf, would never." "He's an alpha wolf, Kyra. Sometimes they just take what they want, when they want it." "Not my mate." "Lucinda. I have to go attend to an important matter." Nick called to her. "Okay," she called back, a little thankful that he was leaving, to be honest. She needed to get herself together and probably wasn't going to be able to do it with him here. She returned her attention to the soggy book. Most of the excess moisture wicked away. Lucinda left the book outside in the sun, to help it dry some more, while she made coffee and something to eat. Casually flipped through the pages after eating lunch, careful not to rip them. They were still damp. Stopped on a chapter about bleeding another wolf into your family. She had a clause in her mating alliance about that in case Nick turned her away after they had a pup. "He won't," Kyra piped up. "So why is that one clause in there then?" She returned to her wolf. Kyra just huffed in annoyance. Lucinda knew why now. Nick's father and brothers had all done that. Marked, mated, got an heir and then rejected their mates. That was why it was in there. Obviously, Alpha Corey and Luna Lindy knew this. Otherwise, why would they put something like that in? Lucinda turned the pages carefully as they were still damp and sticking together slightly. She didn't want to damage it any more than it already was. It was interesting. Children from previously bonded mates, where one mate had died, could be bled into the new mate's line. So that they would feel more connected, as though the child or children would feel as though they were their own and the child, in return, would also feel the mother or father's new mate, was now their parent as well. Then there was also, if a bonded pair failed to work out for any number of reasons, it was up to the original pair of wolves, to decide if one would allow the bleeding of said child, into the other's new mate's line. Had to be agreed upon, as the child being bled into the new line would lose its connection to the parent not in the bonded relationship. If the child lived with its mother and the father agreed to allow his child to be bled to her new mate's line, his connection was severed to his child. He would also no longer have a claim over the child, ever. Even if it was an alpha-born child. Lucinda could only imagine Nick had not wanted that clause in their mating alliance at all. Wondered why he hadn't argued it out. Most likely would have tried, she imagined. As he'd have to relinquish full control and rights to their child if they had one and he didn't want her anymore. Honestly, Lucinda couldn't see Nick doing that, giving up his child. She'd gotten to see his very possessive side today. He'd never relinquish his child, heir to his pack. That thought made her wonder if Jeremy was okay. Surely, if Nick had gone off to hunt him down, an alpha on beta fight would be very loud and very aggressive. She would hope Jeremy would call her for assistance. Which she would definitely do. Lucinda would get between them to stop it. She liked Jeremy. A bit like Corey, he was. She could well imagine that underneath all that playfulness and joking around was a very serious and fierce wolf. His wolf she'd seen fight, no non-scene like Kyra actually. Probably why he was the beta. Nick had clearly hand-picked his alpha unit, not having grown up as the pack heir himself, which if he had done he would have grown up with a beta, gamma, and delta's kids all around him to help them bond and become a strong alpha unit. Not having that, he had chosen the wolves around him. She shook her head, she was sure he was fine. Bleeding newborns into a new family grabbed her attention, done only on the rare occasion where both parents were deceased. Usually where the father has already died and the mother died during childbirth. The newborn pup would be given just 1 or 2 drops of the new mother's blood to drink and they would bond to the new mother instantly. Lucinda stared at the book, her hands were trembling slightly, as she forced herself to recall the day the twins were born. She had delivered them, had their amniotic fluid and blood on her hands, on her dress, and Felicia had cut Lucinda's thigh and put Lucinda's blood on both of the twins, covered their tiny heads and bodies with it. Lucinda closed her eyes and tried to recall more detailed images to her mind. It had been a traumatic day and things were a bit hazy. Had the twins tasted her blood? Had Felicia known what she was doing? Did she bleed them to Lucinda on purpose? Her words echoed in Lucinda's mind, "He'll think they're yours," she had told her that day. Lucinda had been sitting with them, watching the events between Felicia and Darwin unfold. She'd had tears running down her face, blurring her vision and, as much as she hadn't wanted to watch, had to, was under orders. Lucinda recalled wiping the tears from her cheeks on more than one occasion, and she had not had a chance to wash her hands. After delivering the twins, their blood would have been on them still. Had Felicia bled them to her, and if so, pain started to spread from her chest, tears welled up, she had not known. Goddess, she was their mother and she'd given them away. Hadn't understood till right this very minute, she was blood bonded to them, it was why she could still feel them, such a strong connection to them. She felt her tears spill down her cheeks. What had she done? So stupid she was that she had not realized before, had given them up and now they belonged to another. Lucinda had no idea if Gabby and James had bled the twins to their line. Lucinda bit her lip when she thought about it. With the new knowledge from this book, she didn't think so. If they had, then surely she wouldn't feel them so much. It also wouldn't have hurt so much for her to leave them. To have James walk them away from her. To feel her bond to them sever so painfully the day Nick had bled her into his pack. Were they still hers? Did Alpha Corey and Luna Lindy know anything? After her story to them, did they realize what had happened? If so, did Gabby and James know too? Is that why they never not even once questioned her actions around the twins, why they never, not even when they were tiny, stopped her from seeing them, spending time with them? She herself had no idea at all. Had told Luna Lindy her story and Luna Lindy had called for her mate, Alpha Corey, to come and listen to the tale. Perhaps Lindy knew what it meant and didn't know what to do about the situation. The twins were alpha-blooded children and she had been wolfless at the time. Unable to care for them. Not really able to care for herself at the time. An emotional wreck, as were the remaining women and children of her pack. They had leaned on each other, some of them now housed together, 2 or 3 of them and a child if one of them had one. She was the only one to live alone. Couldn't look at their sad faces, couldn't deal with how hollow she'd felt, let alone looking at them and how hollowed out they had looked, especially those that had lost their connection to their wolves for a time. Thankfully, being around each other, and leaning on each other, knowing and understanding completely each other's trauma had helped them all to survive it. Lucinda had no wolf at the time. She didn't feel exactly what they had felt, couldn't truly understand all their grief, and though she had taken many months to recover. It had taken some of them a year or more to start to come back to a real functional level. Most of them lived and worked together in a small little community inside of Half Moon Pack. They had learned, as she had to be a part of the pack and gotten jobs and trained, though none had trained like she had. Lucinda had thrown herself into her training with all she had, trained herself when there was no training, trained at all hours of the day, so she could work and be useful no matter when or what time an attack came. She didn't have the advantages of a wolf-enhanced warrior, and had to do it all on her own. Learn to be vigilant of every sound that was made, to keep her eyes open for any movement. Trained day and night, dawn and dusk, rain or sunshine, sleet or snow. Trained in all of it. To get that edge, that would make her a proper warrior. Never again would she let her people face a slaughter, never again would she be useless to them, never again would she not be able to do anything about it. She would stand up and fight for them, stand up and win, she would save them all. Lindy had said she and Corey knew they still bowed to her, that they both suspected that all of them would come here to live if she and Nick could make it work. All of them would be here for her Luna ceremony, and truth be told, Lucinda wanted them here. Hadn't wanted to leave them back in the Half Moon Pack. Really hoped that they understood why they'd not been able to come with her. Lucinda missed them all. She closed the book, but left it on the table out there between the pod chairs to dry naturally. She had found what she had been looking for, found what she could only believe was the answer to her question. Wasn't particularly happy about it. It hurt to blazes to think about it. She would need to talk with Lindy and Gabby in all likelihood, not over the phone either. It was going to have to be in person. She had no idea what she was going to do about it. Gabby and James loved those little girls as much as she did. The situation was not a good one, and someone was likely going to be hurt by the outcome of it all. Nick was certainly not about to let her go back to Half Moon Pack, not until they had sorted out their bond. She knew Lindy wasn't expecting any visit for at least a month or until her Luna ceremony. Had told her it would only be 4 weeks till she saw the twins again. So, in all likelihood, she was waiting for them to sort things out. Although they had had a nice morning in the end, despite the start to the day, and actually had some fun together, that moment here on this balcony, it didn't wash away all her reservations about him and their mate bond. She also had a lot of stuff he didn't know about her. Had no idea if this pack was, in any way, affiliated with Alpha Darwin or his pack. That did trouble her a lot. Could well imagine the war she would start if he drove in here for an Alpha meeting. If that man turned up here, nothing was going to stop her from getting a piece of him, not even her mate this time. Though the way Rip had reacted, she did doubt that they knew him. If Nick knew Darwin, they would likely have shifted and talked about what was going on. Likely she would have rejected Nick on the spot regardless of what he wanted. She could not in any way be affiliated with Alpha Darwin or anyone who knew him either. Alpha Corey had nothing on Alpha Darwin, as far as he'd told Lucinda, no knowledge of the man, and did not know what pack he'd come from. Felicia had not said what pack either at the time. All Lucinda had was a name and description. Jers, she reached out for Jeremy though the mind link. Hey Lucinda, what can I do for you? A bit of an odd one. I like odd. Lucinda chuckled. You must do, with Nicky around. Jeremy chuckled. Oh, he's not liking that name you gave him at all. Did you survive? She asked cautiously. Survive what? The beating he was going to give you earlier, after the duel. No beating, Lucinda. He's not just the Alpha, but my friend, and a quick chat and we were all good, besides chasing you around put him in a real good mood. Alright, she didn't think it was the chasing around, more like her response to him kissing her neck. As long as you're okay. Aw, you gonna protect me, my Luna, he teased her. Of course Jers, you and me a mischievous pair, we will be, she chuckled, and so did he. Your odd question, he prompted her. Does the pack library hold information on other packs and their alphas? Ah. Now if you intend to hunt down Alpha Darwin, I am not helping you. No, I'm not. Just curious is all. Most of that stuff is in the Alpha's private library. Nick never mentioned that, on the tour. Still a work in progress. So Jers? Ask Nick himself on that one, Lucinda. He'll never let me, she sighed. Might if you tell him why and what happened that day. He sounded a bit concerned to her. Tell me then. I'm not so stupid, Jers. He chuckled. Hey, I can keep a secret. I highly doubt that. Where is he? Sitting here with me in his office, reading up on something important. Thought he didn't work Saturdays. This is kind of really important, I had to call him in on this one. Okay Lucinda, just ask him, he's not likely to say no, if you give him a valid reason. Thanks. She cut the link. Sat on the lounge and wondered how she could get what she wanted. She wasn't about to out her whole pack at this point, and had only known the man for 6 days. So what was a valid reason that he would accept? Lucinda knew Jeremy would have informed Nick of what had happened that day. Reported Beta to Alpha, everything he'd seen. So outright lying to the man was not an option, he'd pick it up right away. He'd also been there in Alpha Corey's office when she'd gotten yelled at. Not to mention seeing how angry she and Kyra had been that day at Darwin. Wanted a piece of him, what it had taken to get her away, and now she was here, apparently for her own good. If it was a lie, it was going to have to be a good one at that. 56. Nick POV. Nick wanted to stay and play with Lucinda, he had gotten the most delightful reaction out of her. Touching her bare skin was more amazing than before. Nick could swear he felt like his whole body was ignited by a bolt of lightning the minute his lips had locked with her neck, had never wanted to taste something so much in his life. Her little gasp had not been surprise, it had been pleasure-filled. He knew that sound. Her heart rate had nearly doubled itself, and she'd actually gone from pushing at his hips to get him away, to gripping onto them. She had enjoyed his mouth on her neck. It hadn't been there for very long, he'd had to walk away himself. For although she had been trying not to let on how much she had enjoyed his touch, it had been obvious to him. Nick was certain his touch, the way it felt for him, was how it felt for her. If he had stayed any longer, he would have been pulling her around to him, to kiss out of her, and that would have led him to either taking her back to their bed to have his way with her, or shoving up against the wall of the balcony, to have his way with her. It had to be her choice, and that was killing him. The woman had good tolerance to their mate bond. He could only put it down to her knowing what to expect. Having been mated before. He, on the other hand, had never felt anything like it ever, and it felt so darn good. Nick. I got some information on Darwin. Jeremy interrupted his thoughts while he was getting dressed. All right, on my way. Nick had replied. He couldn't ignore it. Considering what she and Kyra had been like. He could use the distraction from her, or he was going to be putting his hands and mouth all over her, in an attempt to get her naked and screaming his name. He was looking at her, she had watched him walk away, her breathing increased as his was. He'd caught her looking at him, goddess, he just knew she'd been turned on by him, more than she was letting on. She was now back to focusing on her book on blood bondings. He was still curious as to why she was reading it. Had told him it didn't have anything to do with him or her, he did believe her. It didn't sound like a lie to him. Nick told her he had to go and she didn't seem to mind at all. Okay was her only reaction. Didn't even ask where he was off to. He sighed internally, didn't even seem to want to know what he was up to. They had actually ended up having some real fun today. He'd not expected it at all, not after this morning's discussion in the suite. Not after the one in the library later in the morning either, but they had. Lucinda, it appeared, had actually really enjoyed teasing and taunting him during their rematch, and then when she'd come out with that nickname for him. Nicky, as much as he didn't like it, she had gotten even more playful with him, and he'd really liked her playing with him, especially in front of the pack like that. That last one though, the playful growl that both he and Rip had let out, she'd known he was going to have her, yank her right into him and kiss her for all to see, he hadn't cared. When she'd turned and run, he couldn't have been happier. He loved a good chase, as did most wolves. It was in their nature, the laughing coming from her only increased his wanton need to get his hands on her. Everyone had seen it. Finally, his pack could see that they could get along and have fun with each other. That he was not forcing her to be there. Though only his alpha unit and Granny knew of the mating alliance, his and her lack of being seen, around the pack together, wouldn't have gone unnoticed, or her being off on her own all the time. Nick knew that his warriors had seen him happy at training, that they all knew or would know at that hour of the day, the sun barely being up, that it was because of her. But now they had actually seen it too. He hoped after today things were heading back on track and perhaps some of her reservations had been waylaid. Maybe she would start to trust him a bit. He was only hoping for a bit at a time. He would work on her one day at a time. Trust is hard to earn once broken or destroyed. He felt their mate bond was still going to take a while yet, but he would not give up. Today had showed him and likely her, just how things could be. She had laughed and so had he. They had both been happy. Lucinda hadn't even argued or resisted when he'd carried her upstairs, his prize for catching her, she'd just let him. He'd liked carrying her. Probably why Kevin did it, it felt nice. Nick stepped into his office. Jeremy, Kevin, and Brady were already in there. Nicky, they'd all said in unison. Big smiles on their faces. Great. It starts already, he muttered, and heard them all laugh at him and his reaction to his new nickname. You're all asking for a beating, you know. Never. Lucinda will protect us all. Jeremy grinned right at him. Nick was sure she probably would, he still wasn't happy about how close the man had gotten to his mate. Neither did Rib, for that matter. They were all sitting around in the leather chairs in front of his desk, a few files in front of them on the coffee table. Nick saw the plastic drop cloth over the opening he and Jeremy had made yesterday, into Lucinda's new office, and could hear people working in there. He sat down. "What you got?" "Not much on the man. It seemed to vanish a while ago," Kevin answered him. Nick frowned now. An alpha vanish? Not likely to happen unless he was dead. He took the file handed to him. "Harvest Moon Pack." Nick raised an eyebrow at Kevin. "I know. It's why we had so much trouble finding him. Not local, that was for sure. The Harvest Moon Pack was not even in this country. Was Canadian. North Dakota, between his pack and the Canadian border. His pack residing in South Dakota. What is he doing all the way down here, and how does he know Lucinda?" Nick mused aloud. There was a lot of territory to cover between his and the Half Moon Pack. Most of it is rogue territory, though. It didn't make any sense at all. It surprised him that the Harvest Moon Pack had been seen moving through rogue territory by his brother Alex 8 years ago. Documented a good-sized troop of warriors passing by, well over 100 wolves. He only knew who they were, according to the file he was reading, as on their way back they had stopped and asked for aid for their injured wolves. Alex had apparently declined, on the notion that if they were willing to go so far from home for a fight, then he could not risk them on his pack territory. Had a brain at least. About 70 had returned, some looking worse for wear, highly injured and being carried by others. They hadn't said where they had been, or whose pack they had attacked. Alex had told them to move on, and they simply had. There was no documentation on Darwin himself. The man who'd asked for aid had been a high-ranking warrior, announced himself and the pack, when asked by Alex who he was and where he'd come from. Who his alpha had been. Alex had documented that he had not seen the alpha or his unit among the returning wolves. But Nick knew only an alpha could lead that many wolves to a battle so far from their home territory, especially through so much rogue territory and past other packs who might take it as a threat and attack if they came past the borders to close. There was nothing out there, just the Half Moon Pack. Alpha Corey had told him that he had no idea what pack Darwin had come from. Which didn't surprise Nick. It had taken them a week to find anything about him. Not being in the same country and all. How could Lucinda know the man? He put the file down, still frowning. It didn't add up. He was missing something. What's Harvest Moon Pack doing now? Who's in charge? From all accounts, Alpha Darwin's son, Alpha Wyatt, and they are peaceful. Do you want me to try and contact him? Jeremy answered him. No, not at this point. Nick did not know what to make of it, of the information, which was very little, and he certainly didn't want to contact the pack, in case it led Darwin to come here. How long has Alpha Wyatt been in charge? 8 years, give or take, Kevin answered. So pretty much since they went running past. Appears that way. Kevin nodded. Nick. Brady sighed heavily. Yes. Nick looked at him. Lucinda was mated before. Could he be her first mate? Nick frowned for a moment. Her reaction to the man and what she had said about her mate, being a gentleman, kind and caring, didn't add up to him being her mate. I doubt it. Did not like him at all, Nick answered. Wanted him dead. Jeremy added. Who's to say it was a good pairing? Brady asked. She did, Nick replied. Her first mate never said anything mean or unkind to her. Pretty much what she said. He looked to Jeremy for confirmation. Yes. Jeremy agreed. It's not him and her previous mate, died right. Nick nodded. When she was 18, Samantha told me. So how does she know him? Kevin asked. That was the question. No one could answer. But she did know him, wanted to kill him, in fact. Nick leaned back in the chair and thought about it. He needed more information, but he doubted Lucinda would be willing to talk about it. Hadn't been a week ago. Didn't think this past week, he had created any trust, the opposite actually. She had clearly told Alpha Corey she wasn't willing to discuss it with him in the room, whatever was going on. It had upset her. She'd come out of his office completely upset, and then Alpha Corey had told him the mating alliance was a go. As long as he apologized to Lindy. Alpha Corey and even Luna Lindy, even Gabby, now he thought about it, they all wanted her well away from Alpha Darwin. Didn't trust her not to go after him. That had done something to his mate. But what? All Nick knew was it was before she had Kyra, when she was wolfless and would have been helpless against an alpha wolf. Might just kill him ourselves. Rip piped up. Appeared just as annoyed by the thought that this Darwin fellow had hurt their mate. Get some answers, first. Nick replied. Torture him good, if need be. Agreed. Nick replied. He turned his attention to the other files on the table. They would only be here if they were related to Harvest Moon Pack or Darwin himself. It was about an hour later when Kevin kicked him lightly and nodded towards Jeremy, who was having a conversation via the mind link, with someone. Not like him to do that while reading and investigating important matters, and this was of the utmost importance. When he finished, Jeremy looked right at Nick. Sorry boss. But I can't ignore the Luna when she calls. Any more than I can you. What? Don't stress, I just told her to ask you. You'd likely tell her the answer. Answer to what? Access to your private library. Nick frowned now. He'd not told her about that, it was new to the pack, he'd only been working on it a few months. Only he and the Alpha unit had access to it. Did you tell her I had one? It came up as a response to her question. Jeremy nodded. Didn't think it was a secret. It's not, he nodded. He would have gotten around to telling her at some point, after this Alpha Darwin stuff was sorted out. All that was in it, was literally information on other packs and their alphas, including packs he was affiliated with, packs he wouldn't go near, and packs that had attacked his pack or he had attacked for whatever reasons needed at the time. Just basic info: Alpha, an Alpha unit, plus their mates. Pack size, number of warriors if he could get that information, pack location, type of pack terrain, what human world companies they held. Is she looking for Darwin? Probably, Jeremy nodded. What was the question, Jeremy? Does the pack library hold information on other packs and alphas? I told her if she was looking for Darwin, I would not help her. Great. So she is going to actively hunt the man. We need to sort this out, and fast. He didn't like it at all. He could feel Rip was getting agitated by the news too. Ask her. Kevin said simply. She won't tell me. Whatever it is, wouldn't discuss it with Alpha Corey, while I was in the room. Outright refused to, even when faced with my anger. Snapped her lips shut and glared at me. Don't ask her for the whole story. Just the reason why. Kevin shrugged. Women can be tricky and stubborn. He shook his head. Take my mate Phoebe, for instance. Understands my reason for waiting on pups. But gets mad at me about it at the same time. Says she'll wait, is happy to wait. But then we argue about it another day. He closed his eyes. Frustrating to say the least. Nick was glad to hear that mated wolves didn't always agree on things. made him feel a smidgen bit better about him and Lucinda. This would be the first time he'd heard it from Kevin though. Had seen it with his father and his brother's mates. But they had been treated terribly and cheated on, so, of course, pain and hatred had filtered into their relationships. "Give her a pup, Kevin," Nick stated. "I told you, don't wait on me. When you found her." "I know, Nick. But traditionally, the Alpha unit would wait till you and your Luna would announce you're having a pup, boss. Then we'd all go off and have one of our own. So the pups could all grow up together, be friends and make for a really good strong Alpha on Alpha unit bond. For your heir. I know this, Kevin. Don't wait on me. Could be a good while yet." Lucinda stated 5 or 10 years before she wanted a child, last night. That snapped all their heads up and he found 3 sets of eyes on him. "What?" he asked at their looks. "Boss, you're not allowed to ask for an heir," Jeremy commented. "I didn't," she brought it up, after hearing some of the pack members talk about how I was going to toss her aside, the minute I got an heir from her. "What?" all 3 of them yelled, shooting up onto their feet. They all looked angry to Nick. "What members?" Brady yelled. "I'll go sort this out, now, Nick." "I don't know," he shrugged. 2 women in the library. Brady was gone. Stormed out of the office, banging the door shut behind him. They were all staring at the door. It was unlike Brady to rile up over anything at all. The man didn't seem to have a cranky button. "Not good, Nick." Kevin sighed, sitting back down. "I know. No trust at the moment. Asked me to prove it and I couldn't. How do you prove something like that?" Nick still didn't know, he sighed. "But today, at least I got some answers. Not that I wanted to hear them, to be honest. But I know exactly where I stand now and why." "And?" Kevin asked, leaning forward. His gamma instincts wanted to know about the Luna and her feelings, more than the man was trying to pry. Nick guessed. He sighed and rubbed his hand over his face. "Has reservations, because I bled her into the pack against her will. Apparently had been willing to try before that. Now not so much. But," he held up his hand as both Kevin and Jeremy opened their mouths to voice a question or comment. Neither looked happy. He realized stated she was not going to reject me at this point. Nick watched as both men leaned back in their chairs. Kevin was still frowning, pondering on the information he'd just heard. Jeremy just smiled and nodded, seemed happy in fact. Nick wondered, not for the first time, just what his beta's relationship status with his mate was. Obviously, they talked. "Do you hang out with Lucinda?" he asked Jeremy directly. "Nope. Just like-minded, I think." Jeremy commented and smiled right at him. "I did tell you, I thought she and I would get along, Nick." Nick nodded, he'd also known this too. "I'd advise you don't be alone with her. Might find Rip's jaws around your neck." "Nick, she is not a redhead. I assure you, not my type at all." His voice was firm and serious. "Still, Rip and I did not like the way she leaned on you earlier," he told Jeremy. There was a slight warning in his tone, couldn't help it. She was his mate and he didn't want other wolves touching her. "I saw, just remember, Nick. If she does that, she is pressing your buttons on purpose. Besides, it brought out your desire to be possessive of her. Good for her to see." "Why is that a good thing?" he frowned. Kevin snorted. "Oh, Nick," he shook his head. "It told her and her wolf, that she belongs to you. That no one else is allowed near her. To touch her, and you're willing to kill anyone who tries, friend or foe. It's a good thing. Trust me." All mates get jealous and protective of each other. It's a natural part of your mate bond. I don't need her thinking, I am some cruel. Nick thought, not when she already stated she thought he was. He was going to have to work on that, getting her to see him in a new light. You're not. Jeremy smiled at him. She won't see your possessiveness that way. Nick hoped not, he felt like he was losing his battle, but a battle he wasn't willing to give up. 57. Lucinda POV. All the thoughts running around in Lucinda's mind, about the twins. About what she could do about it, would or would not do about it. Were making her a little crazy and anxious. She couldn't sit still, prowling around and around the suite. How was she going to approach the subject with Gabby and James? Should she even approach it with them at all? What about the twins themselves? How would they feel about this? Should she even tell them? This would make their little lives a turmoil. It wouldn't be so bad if she was still in the Half Moon Pack and could see them every day. That would actually make her decision easier. She wouldn't tell them, just live with the knowledge, because she would still get to see them every day. But here, she was so very far away from them. Missed them every day. If she brought it up, she was going to have to go through with everything. The need to go back to Half Moon Pack and try and sort it out was starting to weigh on her. She did want to sort it out. Needed to know if Lindy and Corey knew about her blood bond with the twins, and if so, why hadn't they told her? Things would likely be very different right this minute. She would not have given them up, would have asked for help to raise them, but never left them. Lucinda had been prowling around inside the suite now for well over an hour, going over everything about it. Not even Kyra was happy with the new information they had learned, and, although she and Kyra had only been together 4.5 months, she loved those little girls too, just as much as Lucinda did. Staying put and not being able to hit the gym to train or go down to the pool and do laps to get some of her stress over the situation out, due to the restrictions that Nick had put on her, meant that they had no outlet for their emotions, not hers and not Kyra's. Kyra had already picked up one of the pod chairs out on the balcony and tossed it, clear up and over the balcony railing. It now lay shattered on the ground just in front of the pack house's western garden bed. There was not much Lucinda could do about it, they needed an outlet. She was likely going to get into trouble over it and have to apologize, but it was too late to save the chair. Kyra would do as Kyra would do. Run. Kyra growled at her in her frustrations at not being about to do as she please. Currently wanted to shift and run all over the place. Not allowed without him. Lucinda reminded her. You run. I will push you, she snarled. Kyra's need to be on the move was making Lucinda want to be on the move, and stalking around inside the suite just wasn't cutting it. The gym had plenty of treadmills she could use. Can't go to the gym, Scott will tell him we're there, she reminded her wolf. Outside. Kyra snarled at her again as she stood in the living room contemplating that option, felt Kyra push her claws out and grab hold of the back of the lounge, puncturing the soft material, ripping it as she dragged them slightly across the top. All right, outside, Lucinda agreed before the lounge got further destroyed, in human form. Lucinda knew her wolf well enough to know that things were about to start getting ripped into and smashed apart, inside this suite. One pod chair was already dead and the lounge now had claw marks on it. It was time to go and run, or everything would likely need replacing. Lucinda changed into 3/4 dark pink tights and a white gym top, threw on a simple pale pink tank top and her joggers, pulled her up into a ponytail and stepped out of the suite. She looked at the elevator and then the stairs. Not a good idea, to go out the front door. Knew Nick was in his office, that's what Jeremy had told her. If his door was open he would see her. For certain, the man had eyes like a hawk where she was concerned. Turned and looked down the other end of the hall, she knew there would be a set of stairs down there, for the Omegas to use, concealed and out of sight, to come up and clean or put laundry away. Often used those stairs back in Half Moon Pack, it had just been quicker to get to her house. She turned and headed that way. They were well away from his office, which was situated in the middle of the pack house. If she went out the western entrance, less likely she would be seen by him or his unit. She knew where Jeremy was, but not Kevin or Brady. Didn't think it was likely, they would think she'd use the Omega entrances, to get about. They exited the building and headed right to the western forest. They stopped just past the tree line, looked about. Didn't think going north would be a good idea. The bears in breeding season, could get surprised by a bear, that would only serve to tick Nick off even more. When he found out, she was out running. Which Lucinda knew he was going to find out. She was just hoping that maybe he wouldn't, that maybe it was only Scott and the lifeguard who were looking out for her. Lucinda turned south and ran. Kyra boosted her speed almost right away. They came across a well-worn path, heading west, and turned to follow it. It went for a good 4 or 5 kilometers and ended up at the training grounds. She was not allowed in there, though that agility course could ease some of her tension. It was a no-go zone as well. It also could be seen from the pack house. She turned south and continued to run on. Her brain had stopped ticking, it seemed, but now that they were outside and running, they just wanted to run for the free feeling it gave her and Kyra. They were still a little tense and could run some more. So Lucinda ran on with Kyra pushing her, boosting her strength the whole time. Kyra wanted to be out on her own, running freely in her wolf form, but was not allowed. Found themselves by a large gated-off construction site. It was a massive building. The new school, she thought. Nick had mentioned it on the tour, but had not shown her. They ran on past it and eventually hit the border. Lucinda stumbled to a stop and backed up real fast. Had already been in trouble once for crossing it, didn't need to be punished again, for the same mistake. She hadn't meant to cross it at all. She had just been running so fast that she had not seen any border patrol and so hadn't been able to stop in time. She stood there just inside the border, looked around to see who was about, saw a wolf watching her to her right, clearly had seen her cross the border and back up too. Going too fast, I ran right over the border by accident. She smiled at it. But on the inside she was not smiling. She was waiting for Nick's angry voice to come down the mind link about leaving his pack territory, or being out running for that matter. The wolf inclined its head towards her, acknowledging it had heard her statement but was still watching her. She turned around back towards the pack itself and waved at the wolf, then jogged off, heading away from the border. Picked up her pace a minute later. If she knew where the borders were, it wouldn't be a problem. But no, the man wouldn't show her the pack territory map. Lucinda felt irritation build up inside of her. Her accident in crossing the border was his fault technically. She headed east, hadn't been over there before, and ran some more. Hit another border, but this time saw the patrol and stopped beforehand. It wasn't hard to see them, 4 wolves, 2 in human form, 2 in wolf. She was standing before the pack entrance. There was a very large double gate with security cameras point in both directions out down the road that led to the pack and up the road on the inside of the pack. This place was covered in cameras. Even if she wanted to hide, it was unlikely she'd get far. Nothing was getting past all the cameras he had everywhere. The huge gates were made of blue steel and looked to slide open back across themselves, unlike Corey's gates that swung open. There was what appeared to be the pack's logo on the front side of it, a large blue circle, likely a representation of the blue moon the pack was named after. She found herself under the watchful eyes of all 4 of his patrols, guessed they'd not seen her before, and her just standing there staring at the gate was a bit odd. She smiled at them, nodded her head and turned away to head down the road, didn't want them reporting to him that it looked like she was thinking about bolting out the gate, not that it was open at all. Sure would tick him off. The man got ticked off easily, it seemed, or where she was concerned. Always in some sort of trouble. She was running up the road, knew it would lead her back to the pack house. It was the main entrance. It was a likely assumption. Let's see how far it is and how long it takes to get there, Kyra agreed. She liked knowing how long it would take her to get from one place to another, if help was requested. They ran at top speed. It took a good 70 minutes with Kyra pushing her. This pack was long. She'd walked more than an hour north of the pack house and hadn't hit the northern border. Bigger than Kori's pack, but it had to be expected it was 2,000 wolves strong. Kori's had only been 800. Her pack had only been 400, now just 63, if she included herself and the twins. Lucinda slowed down as the pack house came into view, a very large white building with green forest behind it. She liked it, though it did look like a large hotel, she guessed. Any human flying over would just think this place was a resort town in all likelihood. It was how most packs looked to humans. Small quaint towns or retreats for holiday makers. Lucinda looked down at the state of her running gear and smiled at herself. She was dripping with sweat, it was running down her back and off her face and abdomen. Her light pink tank top was stained with sweat. She had mud splattered up her legs from running through the forest and crossing through many creeks. Ah, we're so not getting away with this. She smiled to herself again. Was going to try though. Just had to sneak back in and plead ignorance. Not training. Kyra piped up. I know, but I doubt Nick will see it that way. Now, where have you been? A deep voice came from next to her. Lucinda had been lost in her thoughts and not heard or seen anyone approach her. Brady was standing right there next to her, not 2 feet away, his arms folded across his chest. Know where she tried with a smile, busted in by one of his most loyal. Wrong answer, he commented, and then waved at her to walk forward, like a naughty school girl. Hey, we outrank him. Kyra piped up. He'll tell Nick anyway, she replied. I was itching for a run. Not training, Lucinda offered up. Just she turned to look at him. Ha! Yeah, I see Nick believing that he eyed off her muddy state. Keep walking, young lady. Yes, Dad, she replied sarcastically and rolled her eyes, continued to walk towards the pack house. We can outrun him. Kyra piped up, seemed to be in a mischievous mood now that she'd run out her other issues. Lucinda fake scratched her head, which tilted to the side and down a little, to glance at his feet and see what shoes he was wearing. Biting her lip a little. Oh, go ahead and try it, he laughed, seemingly knowing what she was thinking. I deal with Jeremy on a daily basis. Couldn't hurt, she said, looked right at him, then shoved him with all her strength and watched the surprised look on his face as he actually fell over. She poked her tongue out at him and shot off to her left, heading for the western woods. Kyra chortling the whole way, boosting her speed. Oh, we're so getting in trouble. Gotta catch us first. Kyra piped up. Omega stares, before he hunts us, we'll get rid of the evidence and feign ignorance. Lucinda giggled, it wasn't like there were a million cameras for him to see her. They both snorted. Bolted as fast as they could through the woods, heading for the very stairs they'd used to get out of the pack house undetected. As they ran across the cleared area from the woods to the pack house, she spied Nick and Jeremy heading down the road towards where she left Brady. He was pointing off in the direction she had gone. "We'll make it, never get us now," Kyra chortled. They ran all the way up the stairs to the top floor and burst out onto the alpha floor, a massive smile on Lucinda's face, outsmarted the almighty alpha, pleased with themselves. Until a hand clamped down on her arm. Her head whipped around. Kevin was standing there smiling right at her, clicked his tongue at her and shook his head. "I got 2 little sisters, just like you, now what to do with you?" he asked a little teasingly. Lucinda grinned at him. "Oh, come on Kevy, turn a blind eye. You saw nothing." Kevy he rubbed his chin thoughtfully. "Nope, don't like it. And not in the mood to be punished by the alpha for aiding and abetting." "No thank you." Lucy he smiled down at her. Lucinda laughed, that nickname wouldn't bother her. He strolled down the hall with his hand around her arm, walking her to the elevator and probably right to Nick's office and his waiting cranky face. "Not like it's the first time we have seen it." Kyra huffed. "Ah, more often than not. You're too naughty nowadays." "Me," Kyra snorted. "I'm just a puppy, 4.5 months old. Oh, is that how you want to play it?" "Can't blame me, you fully grown." Kyra chortled and rolled around in her mind. They were standing waiting for the elevator, his hand still on her arm though his grip wasn't tight. Their dash was done, she thought absently. "Is it?" Kyra snorted at her. "Uh-oh," Lucinda thought as she felt Kyra suddenly surge forward and take control of her body. The minute the elevator was open, she spun around pulling her arm from a shocked Kevin and shoved him into the elevator, poked her tongue out at him as he looked over his shoulder from on his knee where he had fallen and bolted off, down the east wing. Heard Kevin yell her name, part Kevin, part his wolf. They had not missed, that it was Kyra playing with him. Kyra did not stop running. They hit the Omega stairs at the other end of the pack house, and ran all the way down them, past the exit to the outside, that was too obvious, went down another floor to the basement. It was dark and like a maze, got turned around and had to backtrack several times. So many rooms down here that went nowhere, just for storage. Lucinda had no idea where she was going, or even how to get out now. "Lucinda, where are you?" Nick's voice came down the mind link. Oh, it was such a weird feeling. She knew instantly it wasn't just a line to her, but his whole alpha unit as well, sent a shiver down her spine. Oh, it was so weird. A kind of extra tingly feeling made her shake her head. "I don't know," she answered with a giggle. "I never been here before." She heard both Jeremy and Brady laugh at her statement. "You can't hide from me," he returned to her, sounded a little annoyed with her. "Ah, what else was new?" "He doesn't know that," Kyra chortled inside her mind. "I might be able to. I'm small and fit into tiny spaces." She laughed now, couldn't help it. Kyra's mischievous mood was affecting her now too. She tried to close off the link but all of them were holding it open, it seemed. "He's using it to track us." Kyra snorted. "I can smell you, my dear," he replied. "Nope. I'm all clean now," she giggled as she stepped into the pack house's laundry. It was empty, no one worked today, it seemed. Looked around for something, anything that would help mask her scent from him. She found nothing. If he was using his nose to hunt her, Rip would be tracking her via their mate bond, that unique smell just to him, that was his mate. Damn it, they needed to get out in the open, faster out in the open. Lucinda turned at the sound of a door closing in the basement behind her. He was coming, and likely fast. She muttered out loud and ran through the room to the only other door she could see at the other end. Yanked the door open and ran right into him. Bounced off his hard body in her rush and fell on her at his feet. He was standing there staring down at her, his hands on his hips, looking very annoyed with her. She started to giggle, couldn't help it. Kyra was rolling around inside her mind, chortling so hard it was affecting her too. Her wolf was so amused at their mate's face. Not to mention that from down here he kind of looked like a giant to her. He was so freaking tall. It was a good try, she thought to herself. We can dodge him. Kyra suddenly piped up again. He'll be big and slow. She looked at him through Lucinda's eyes. Still wanting to play, even more so now, her mate was right in front of her, it seemed. I wouldn't Kyra, he said and reached down to grab her. Kyra shook her whole body inside Lucinda's mind, then grinned right up at him. I'll play. She surged forward and ducked and rolled away from him with all her speed, got up and ran down the hall, did not get far, a dozen steps and they were crashed to the ground by him. Need a better head start, Lucinda told her. He is fast. Kyra chortled. They were picked up off the ground by him, turned to face him, and the cranky look on his face only made her start to laugh. Her reaction to his anger only made him more mad, it seemed, and gales of laughter came out of her, so much so she was having trouble staying upright and it was causing a stitch in her side. Even with him glaring down at her she couldn't stop, seemed she was in a fit and couldn't pull herself out of it, no matter how much she tried. Well, at least her mood was better than before. My office now, he grated out. That sobered her up quickly. She did not want to go there, had told herself never again would she go where she wasn't welcome. Finally, she managed to pull herself together. I'm not going in there, she told him, crossing her arms over her chest. You wanna bet? He snapped. Yes I do, she shot back. He slowly raised an eyebrow at her and looked oh so serious, as he stared down at her, and it was her complete undoing, it seemed. She tried to hold it in but couldn't, practically keeled over laughing. It was all Kyra's fault, she burst out when she was picked up and tossed over his shoulder. Oh was it, he replied as he carried her off down the hallway. It was all her fault, punish her. She was still laughing, not even Kyra seemed to care, she was copping all the blame. She could see Jeremy and Brady strolling behind him now, they'd obviously been the ones hunting her through the basement and were smiling at her. Aw come on Jers, she shot down the mind link, help a girl out. Saw him laugh out loud, oh no, you're on your own for this one. You gotta give me a heads up in the future. Lucinda was carried down several hallways. She had no idea where she was until she recognized the foyer of the pack house. He was actually taking her to his office. She didn't want to go in there. Kyra did not either. Latched onto the door frame, all claws out as he walked through it, digging them deep in the wood. They were not going into his office. Saw his unit stop and stare at her. It was both her and Kyra in agreement on not going into his office. Nick stumbled backwards at the sudden resistance. He'd not been expecting her to try and stop him. Let go, he shot at her. No. I'm not going in your office again. Oh yes you are, he sounded angry that she was defying him. I'll let Kyra bite you, she warned him, meaning every word. All play was now gone. Kyra let out a low growl to back up her words. She felt his whole body freeze. He didn't know if Kyra would not in your office. Kyra snarled at him, and then removed one hand from the frame of the door and touched her claws to his back. Lucinda did not want to be in his office, neither did Kyra, for that matter, not after their last visit to it. He seemed to get the message and backed up out of the office and turned and walked down the foyer to the elevator. Kyra retreated the minute he walked away from his office. Nick didn't say a single word the whole way to the Alpha suite. He put her down on the lounge. She saw his eyes register the damage to his lounge. "I told you it was Kyra. What happened?" was all he said, looking down at her. "We needed to run. It wasn't training, we just needed to clear our heads," she tried to explain to him. "How long did you go running for?" he asked. Lucinda shrugged. She honestly didn't know. "We don't like being cooped up." "You're not cooped up, you can go anywhere you like," he stated flatly. Lucinda huffed. "I wanted to train to hit something and I'm not allowed, so a run it was," she again tried to explain to him. He was frowning down at her. "Don't ever threaten me again, Lucinda, I don't like it." Then he turned and left the suite. "Not in as much trouble as we thought," Kyra piped up. "It's not over." Lucinda sighed. "Not by a long shot. He had in all likelihood left to go calm down." 58. Nick POV. Boss Brady's voice came through the mind link. "Yes. Lucinda's out running. Just pushed me over to stop me from bringing her in, though for the seriousness of the situation, Brady sounded fully amused. Playing with me, boss," he added. "Playing with you?" "Yeah, it looks that way. Now she's been caught." Nick sighed. She'd been warned about training. Seems she didn't care, or thought perhaps after their moment upstairs she might be able to get away with it. It appears Lucinda is out running around," he told Jeremy and Kevin. "What?" Kevin asked. "Who knows," pushed Brady over and ran away from him. Nick really wasn't in the mood to chase or punish her for that matter. Needed to figure out who and what this Darwin fellow was to Lucinda. Jeremy chuckled at him. "Game on, I see. If she's like me, Nick." Nick muttered. She was a bit like Jeremy indeed, he'd seen it today with their duel. They headed out of the pack house and could see Brady some way off in the distance pointing over to the western woods, though he noted Brady had not attempted to go after her. Why not? Either she was too fast, even in human form, for him, or he figured Nick would enjoy the chase as he'd done earlier. But Nick had more pressing things now that he'd realized she was going to actively hunt Darwin. Rip scented her easily once they got to where Brady was, and they went off into the woods to get her. Jeremy was chuckling next to him. "Pack house, East Wing," Kevin informed them, as he'd opened a mind link to all of them for the moment, heading down the Omega stairs. "Down the stairs. I had her, boss. Tried sneaking in, used the Omega stairs on the western side. Kyra took me out to get away, playfully so, boss." "Great," Nick muttered. "It's a good thing. Come on, Nick, she's settling in." Jeremy chuckled and all his unit chuckled too. Except for him. "Corner her, block off the Omega stairs, and one of you check to see if she went outside or down to the basement. Come on, Nick, play with her." "Jeremy, I have more pressing needs today, and you know it, after your conversation with her. I guess. If she goes into the basement, bring her to me. Laundry is the only way out." "Yes, boss," they all answered. 5 minutes later, Nick stood and waited by the laundry door. Why she thought she could hide from him? He didn't know, he knew every inch of this place. She'd only been here 6 days. She burst out of the laundry and slammed right into him, looked up at him fully amused with herself. What he saw, however, was his mate sweat-drenched, covered in mud. He had told her no training, and yet she had gone off and done it anyway, been out running for a long time by the looks of the amount of sweat stains on her clothes. Saw Kyra peer right up at him, and then try to get away from him. Even after he warned her, Rip was happy and amused by his mate, it seemed. Nick not so much. He run her down quickly, she was fast, tackled her to the ground and then stood and picked her up, put her on her feet. She was laughing, and appeared couldn't stop herself either. Goddess help him, she reminded him of Jeremy right this minute, in Granny's house. Laughing hysterically with no control. Near fell over, she was laughing so hard. Sobered up instantly the minute he told her to go to his office. An odd response to his demand. Outright told him she wasn't going. Well, she was well going. He picked her up and took her there himself. Near fell over backwards at her suddenly latching onto the door frame. When she refused to go inside, his annoyance rose to anger. He was shocked when she told him she would let Kyra bite him. He didn't think it was real until Kyra backed her up and he felt claws on his back and heard Kyra announce, "Not in your office." He knew she probably would. There was an issue here. So to resolve it quickly and not turn this into a full-blown fight with her, he turned and headed for their suite. He didn't say a single word, waiting for the elevator or the ride up, and neither did they, just stayed quite draped over his shoulder. Their own mates, had just voiced a threat against them, even Rip was quiet, not certain what to make of it or why not the office. So they rode in silence and wondered why? It appeared neither Lucinda or Kyra had a problem with their suite, but they did have one with his office. He didn't understand it. It was just an office. He let himself into the suite and when he put her down on the lounge, saw the claw marks in the top of it and frowned. "I told you it was Kyra," Lucinda informed him. He was inclined to believe her right this minute. "What happened?" he asked, now curious, because she had been fine when he'd left the suite, actually they both had been. He did not want to fight with her again today. Had managed to get past it and actually have some fun. Then that moment on the balcony. Needed to clear her head, but couldn't answer how long she'd been out running. They told him they didn't like being cooped up. But she wasn't at all cooped up, could go anywhere she liked whenever she liked. He had not told her to stay put. He didn't understand her comment. It was only when she stated she needed to hit something that he understood something else was going on. That whatever she had found answers to had likely ticked her off. He always found wolves wanting to punch and hit things, destroy things when they were mad. She would be no different to other wolves. "Don't ever threaten me again, Lucinda, I don't like it." Probably came across as a bit of a threat, but he couldn't help it. They had issues and clearly his office was on her agenda. The more he thought about it, the times she'd been in his office. Nick realized it could be one of many reasons she didn't want to go to his office. Nick sank down in his office chair. For Kyra to threaten him, not just Lucinda. Both of them. It was likely they were still both mad at him for bleeding her into his pack, right here in this office. It was the last time they'd been in here. Nick rubbed his temples. He was getting a headache. "Nick?" Jeremy asked. "Nothing. I will do nothing about it." He knew what his beta meant. His clear-cut, no-nonsense tone said it all. "Boss. Let it go, Jeremy. I know Kyra threatened me, they're still upset over being bled into the pack. Likely the reason why, she doesn't want to come in here. Apologize for it," he was advised by his beta. "No. I still think what I did was valid." Nick shook his head. "They'll get past it. She just needs time." "If you say so," he didn't sound convinced. "She said so." Nick clarified to him. "Now help me with Darwin's timeline, please. Let's map it all out, what we know about him. Then let's map out Lucinda and what we know about her. Compare the two. See what we can get from it. Seeing as she is not going to tell me. And is going to hunt him. Yes, boss. Nick and Jeremy were both standing in front of the whiteboard. The top half had Darwin and Harvest Moon Pack on it and the bottom half had Lucinda and Half Moon Pack on it. All the information he had about each of them there on it. There wasn't much to look at. To be honest, the date Alex had documented Darwin and his wolves going southwest and the date they had returned without Darwin and his Alpha unit. Just one day between trips. The battle they had started had not lasted long. Who they took on and the outcome unknown. Then the date Lucinda had antagonized him. 8 years between the two things. Nick had heard her say, well, yell at Alpha Core that was him, and that was the extent of his information on her and Darwin's interactions. Her timeline was just as empty, 18 marked and mated for the first time. Had to be when she was 18. That was when you got the first chance to find your goddess-gifted mate, if you were lucky, that was, and also because he had died when she was 18. A very short time together, he now realized, could have been just weeks, or a few months. He didn't know, doubted she would tell him at this point. Her parents had also died when she was 18. She got that scar on her leg when she was 18. Kyra had appeared, according to Alpha Corey, the day they had challenged each other, so 4.5 months ago. He being her mate only 8 days ago, her antagonizing Darwin that same day. Her life seemed clean and simple, she stayed and lived in Half Moon Pack. Worked with their retrieval team for a long time, 6 years or so. Whatever had gone down or happened, he was certain it had been when she was 18. Alpha Darwin had been missing for the past 8 years, it seemed, and it had been 8 years since she had turned 18. They'd had a run-in of some kind when she was 18. It was all he could come up with. Jeremy agreed with him on that one. But neither of them knew what. Alpha Corey had said he didn't know the man or which pack he'd come from. He had told Nick he'd not been there to see her parents die, or her mate die either. Perhaps they had been off-pack territory, when it happened. Perhaps that was why he didn't see it happen. But if something had happened, how did she, a wolf-less girl at 18, survive, and with twin girls no less? Maybe her parents and her mate protected her, fought so she could get away with the sisters. Jeremy offered. It was a good thought. Did make sense. A lot of sense actually. Her mate and parents would have protected her. But Darwin had over 100 wolves with him. Nick didn't think that was it. Wrote it down on the board though as an option, but didn't think that was it. 3 against an Alpha and his unit or all his men. No, she wouldn't have gotten away. Nick closed his eyes and sighed heavily. Perhaps she didn't get away. Was just left behind, when he was done with her. Pain shot right into him at that thought. He did not like where his mind went on that at all. Turned and walked right out of his office, leaving Jeremy standing there alone in his office to figure it out. He went right to their suite, found her sitting on the lounge watching TV, walked right over and sat down, pulled her onto his lap and put his arms around her and just hugged her. He probably needed it more than she did right now. He didn't want to think about it anymore or what that had probably done to his mate. Nick, she queried softly, didn't try to pull away from him though. Just let me hug you, he practically whispered, burying his face into her neck and holding her tightly to him. He just wanted to hold her. He would never let anyone hurt her, on his watch. She didn't seem to mind or just let him hold her. Nick didn't care which it was, he just stayed there with her on his lap, his arms around her. For a long time. He felt her hand in his hair at some point, just running her fingers through it. He liked it, it felt nice and calmed him down. Eventually, he looked at her, and she looked at him a little bit worriedly. "I wasn't running away," she offered. "I know you weren't," he nodded. "I'm not mad at you, Lucinda, I just, how was he supposed to put it, worry about you." "Why? I'm fine, you can see that." "I don't think you always were," he sighed. "I don't know, sometimes I just really worry you're going to get hurt." "How?" she asked. "I'm right here in your pack." "I know," he shrugged, "but would she stay here? Would she not run off after that man and get herself injured or worse at some point?" "I was going to watch a movie," she stated, but it kind of sounded like a question to him. "I'll watch with you," he smiled at her. It was nice they were getting alone. "What are you going to watch?" Though he was praying it wasn't some goddess awful girly chick flick. She laughed right at him, it must have been written all over his face. Because she poked him right in the chest. "I'm not a chick flick girl. You don't have to worry about that." "Thank the goddess," he grinned. "There is an alien movie marathon on. I can watch that," he nodded. "Though you might have to cuddle me, in the scary parts." He squeezed her a little. She chuckled. "Can I shower and change first?" "Yep. I'll make popcorn and get snacks," and she hopped off his lap. Nick nearly growled at her, at the sudden loss of her body on his. He really did like having her on his lap, but she was willing to watch a movie with him. He learned something new about her today and it made him feel better. "Where did the balcony chair go?" Nick asked after he showered and changed into his pajama pants. He'd pulled the French doors closed and noted only one there. Lucinda was now looking up at him a little guiltily as he walked into the living room, biting her lower lip. "Don't get mad. I'm curious is all," he told her, though from her statement he knew it wasn't going to be good. Kyra threw it over the balcony. Nick stared at her now. She had told him before Kyra got destructive, this would be the first time he had seen it. So he was a chair down and a custom-made lounge with claw marks in it too. He shook his head. "We were warned," Rip piped up. "Guess, I'll have to replace it then," Nick replied to her. He really didn't want to fight with her, he was just trying to get alone with her from now on. That was his new mission. "Sorry," she offered up. Nick shrugged. "I've destroyed many bits of furniture myself." "What's one chair?" He dropped himself onto the lounge next to her and made himself comfortable. She started the movie and he pulled her even closer to him, and Lucinda didn't seem to mind, leaned in on his chest, put her popcorn bowl on his lap even. "Nick. Millimeter, go to bed," she whispered to him. He was too comfortable to get up. "You're sleeping," she told him softly. There was a smile in her voice. He could detect it. His eyes opened and he blinked a few times, didn't even know when he'd fallen asleep. The movie, he noted, was over though. "Come on then," he yawned. Grabbed the remote, turned the TV off, stood and picked her up bridal style. If he was going, so was she. He carried her into their bedroom and put her down in the bed, climbed in himself, and curled around her. "You smell good," he murmured into her neck, making himself comfortable, and could already feel sleep pulling him back in. 59. Lucinda POV. Lucinda woke, a little startled. Something had woken her but she wasn't sure what. It was way too early. The sun wasn't even up yet. "Sorry." Nick growled softly into her neck, "It was my alarm." "Too early, it's still dark outside." "Why?" she mumbled, closing her eyes again. "Alpha training this morning with my unit." His body was pressed right up against hers. She realized, her front to his, she could feel his mouth on her neck a moment later. Bit her lip at the softness of his mouth on her skin. Felt his hand slide up her back slowly, drew in a deep breath as her whole body filled with electric tingles, at his touch, at the feel of his body pressed against her. Goddess, his mouth on her neck. His mouth moved slowly, softly, and gently up towards her ear, and she heard a soft sensual growl come from him and his wolf as her body moved instinctively against his, pressing against him even more. Then he was on top of her, her whole body underneath his mouth was on hers, a long slow kiss. Lucinda sighed right into his mouth and kissed him back, her tongue touched his, slid along his, deepening the kiss as her hands moved up into his hair. Goddess, he tasted so good. Felt so darned good against her. His mouth moved away from her and she drew in breath, moaned softly as his mouth moved down her neck again. She felt his body react to hers as she arched up to him. Goddess, she was hot all over, could feel her own desire building for him. Moaned even louder when he shifted slightly so she could feel his hard CK pressed against her aching core. Rocked himself against her slowly, firmly. Lucinda gasped as pleasure erupted from everywhere, grinned up against him, as he was doing to her, slid her hands from his hair down his chest and heard him groan at her touch. He bit her neck a little harder just below the ear and she gasped out loud. Goddess Lucinda, I want to mark and mate you, he growled deeply, huskily into her ear. His mouth was on her neck, moving down, hit her mark spot, he kissed it hungrily and a bolt of pure hot electricity shot right through her. She couldn't help the cry of pleasure that it elicited from her. Her mark spot was so sensitive to his touch. He didn't stop kissing it, tasting her, was sucking on her mark spot, his hips rocking against her still, her whole body was aching for him, she could smell her and his arousal. It was all around her, only when she felt his teeth on her neck, did her senses come back to her, and she realized he was going to mark her. Nick, stop, she gasped, suddenly shoving at him. Her desire fell away and panic filled her. No, he growled, I want to mark you. He was trying to hold her down now. Stop it, she yelled at him. Struck him, hit him as hard as she could. His head whipped up and he was staring down at her now. Get off of me, she yelled at him and was shoving at him again to try and push him away. He was staring down at her and she could see his fangs were out. He had been about to mark her, it was clear, his breathing was heavy and a little ragged, then he rolled off of her. Lucinda practically threw herself out of the bed, her hand touching her neck. She'd seen his fangs, felt them graze her neck even. Hurried to the far corner of the room, had no idea if he was going to come for her again. Wolves did not like to be interrupted when marking and mating and she had stopped him. But that didn't mean he wouldn't try again. He was bigger and stronger than she was. The light came on and she found herself looking at her hand. There was blood there, he'd not actually marked her, but he would have, had tried to. Her eyes moved to him, he was sitting on the side of the bed, watching her. You can't do that, she shook her head. He didn't say anything, just sat watching her for a full minute, then simply said, I didn't mark you. You're fine. I'm fine, she snapped. You were going to. He nodded, didn't even deny it. How could he, when there was blood on her neck? It wasn't much, but still it was there, on her fingers too. It's just a graze. Not the point. It is my choice, Nick, not yours, she shot at him. Oh, I know that, he shot right back, sounded very annoyed about it, in fact. It's not like you weren't enjoying yourself, as much as I was, Lucinda. He stood up and stalked off to the bathroom, closed the door. She heard the shower turn on. Was still standing exactly where she had been, when he came out, as when he'd gone into the bathroom. Nick looked at her with a raised eyebrow, then moved off to the walk-in without so much as a single word. She had no idea what he was thinking. Still looked annoyed with her, was all she could register. Lucinda went into the bathroom and closed the door herself, looked in the mirror at her neck. There were 2 slight marks from where he had grazed her with his fangs. She washed the blood away. He'd lost control and she knew it. The alpha blood in him had been controlling him, trying to take what belonged to him. She sighed, showered quickly. They were going to have to sit down and discuss it. If she wasn't ready, he was going to have to accept it. She just wanted a bit more time. It wasn't like she was going to deny him. Why was it so hard for him to just wait and get to know each other first? She had too much at stake. Had to know she could trust him first. Lucinda stepped out of the bathroom, heard him talking in the living room. At least he was still here for her to talk to him about this. She used her wolf hearing to see who it was. No, I have not, marked or mated her. He still sounded annoyed, a little angry actually, she thought. He got no reply. Must have been on his phone. She needed to get dressed before going out there, took a step towards the walk-in. I love you, sweetheart. His voice had dropped all annoyance and anger, and was now soft and full of meaning. She heard it. Pain ripped right through her. He meant it. She could hear it in his voice. It was the truth. Her whole body froze. He was telling someone else he loved them. I'll see you soon, he said, and she heard him leave the suite, chuckling to himself, sounded happy even. Tears welled in her eyes, spilled down her cheeks. He loved them and was going to see them soon. Even Kyra was snarling inside her mind. Lucinda had not mistaken that tone at all, neither had Kyra. They had both heard him. He'd meant every word he'd said. He was in love with someone else. She was just his mate. He was drawn to her by the bond, but he didn't love her. She stumbled towards the bed, found herself on her knees, pain coursing through her body. It was all a lie. Just playing with you, his words echoed through her mind, from yesterday's duel. That was what he'd told her, he was just playing with her. She was nothing to him. That was why he had never claimed her, just sent his beta, why she was sent for to be presented to him. She belonged to him. That was all and nothing more. A toy he owned and could play with. She was just his mate, not the woman he loved. Lucinda's hands were shaking as she reached for her phone on the bedside table, could barely dial Gabby's number. Come and get me, she sobbed the minute Gabby picked up. Lucinda, what's wrong? It's all a lie, she barely got the words out, was trying to pull herself together, but the pain was so bad. Honey, tell me what's going on, she could hear the concern in Gabby's voice. Lucinda couldn't even get the words out, couldn't voice it. The pain of saying it out loud was too great. Tell Alpha Corey to come and get me. I want to come home. Tears blurred her vision. Honey, I'm sure it's not what you think. Not what she thinks it is. Gabby, please. I can't be here anymore. Alpha Corey won't come, Lucinda. Not just because you don't want to be there anymore. I need the details, honey. Lucinda's head was on her knees as she hugged her knees to her chest tightly, trying to stop herself from feeling anything, squeezing herself so tightly into a tiny little ball, trying to cause herself physical pain. It would be better than this pain. The pain of him loving someone else, the pain of him lying to her, and her stupidly falling for him. Alpha Corey wouldn't come, he needed details. No one believed her. Had she ever lied before about anything to any one of them? No, but they didn't trust her judgment now. He wanted the details. She would give them to him. I'm not allowed to train. I'm not allowed to shift. He confiscated my bow and locked it away. I'm not allowed to patrol. Gabby, he forcibly bled me into his pack. he's in love with someone else. Pain ripped through her all over again just saying those words. She could hear it in her mind, his inconnotation, the softness of his voice as he'd spoken those words. I'm nothing to him. I'm sure he doesn't love someone else, she heard Gabby, knew she was trying to be reassuring. I heard him say it, Gabby, with my own ears, she yelled. There was silence at the other end of the line. Gabby, please, tell Alpha Corey to come and get me. I don't want to be here anymore, she sobbed. Honey, I'm sure it's a mistake. He's your mate. Yet and he's ABD, she whispered, disconnected the line. And threw her phone across the room. No one was going to believe her. But she knew, Kyra knew. They had heard it with their own ears, no mistaking it. He'd been so annoyed with her this morning. Not even seemed to care. Didn't want to discuss it, and now she knew why. He had someone else he was in love with. Had called her. Told her, probably reassuring her he'd not marked and mated her, told her he loved her, was laughing when he left the suite. He'd played her, played everyone. He was just like his family. She was nothing to him. A means to an end, just here to produce that air for him. That was all and nothing more. Kyra was still snarling and growling inside her mind, stalking around. Anger was rolling off of her wolf. It was building inside Lucinda. Kyra felt so betrayed by their mate, it was consuming her every thought, that anger felt better than the pain she was suffering. Lucinda latched onto it, fed off of her wolf's anger, allowed it to connect with her own until she was standing up on her own feet, fists balled at her side, a seething, raging beast filled with nothing but anger. Then she was gone. Kyra was out and in control of her body, ran from the room, slammed into the suite door till it banged open, ripped off its hinges and was lying on the ground before her. She picked it up and tossed it down the hallway and snarled at the empty space it left. Ran down the stairs at full speed, uncaring who or what was in her way. Bolted for the woods, the minute they were outside the back of the pack house, via the door, through the pack dining room, she shifted into her wolf and raced off into the northern woods. Lucinda had been pushed to the back of her mind by her wolf. She did not fight it, wanted to be away. Kyra was now out on a full rampage of unknown proportions. Her anger was all she could feel, Lucinda's anger was also rolled into her own, the two of them now one angry entity. They were feeding off of each other's anger and neither tried to stop the other from their rage. Kyra wanted blood, so did Lucinda. Bloodlust consumed every part of the both of them, anything that moved was now a target to be destroyed. They came across small animals, launched at them and ripped them apart, dumped their lifeless carcasses and moved on, came across a wild boar. It fought back but was no match for Kyra. She tore into it, ripping its limbs off and dismembering it, left its remains and ran on further away from the pack house, and found herself staring down that big buck she'd seen before out here in the northern woods. Snarled at it and charged it, it fought back, used its antlers to defend itself, kicked at her and gouged her in the side before Kyra brought it down her jaws on its neck, ripping its throat out, mauled its side as it lay dead on the ground. Then stood snarling at his lifeless carcass. Turned and ran, her bloodlust still driving her need to kill everything that moved. They came to a halt and stared down at the old woman, blood dripping from her jaws, her lips peeled back in a menacing snarl. The old woman did not move a muscle, seemed to know better. Recognized somewhere deep down inside it was Granny, knew that wouldn't matter if she moved, slowly stalked past her, her eyes on the old woman the whole time. Waiting for the old woman to shift or try to run. The slightest movement and she would become instant prey. She was no different to anything else that moved right that minute. The old woman did not move, as they stalked past her, watched her carefully as Kyra eyed her off, snarling deep and low, threateningly the whole way. The old woman's eyes were the only thing that moved. Kyra moved on, past her and then turned her head and ran further on. Till she was confronted by a very large angry-looking bear that reared up on its back legs and stood growling at her. It snarled at her as she stood snarling at it. The bear was bigger than Kyra, but Kyra didn't care, it was all or nothing, they had nothing left to lose. Their pain and anger at the betrayal left them open to any attack, uncaring of where or what it came from. All her hackles were up. Her ears were flat against her head. Her lips were peeled back, all her bloodied teeth showing from the last kill. It charged at her and she at it. It was going to die like all the rest that had fallen before it. Kyra took a massive hit to the ribs from its massive paw, was tossed aside by the hit, was slammed into a tree back first, could feel that her side was torn open by its claws, could smell her own blood. Got up off the ground and stood up and growled at it, launched herself at it again, was bitten on her shoulder and tossed aside again, rolling over on the ground as she went. She got up and charged it using a nearby tree to get some height and launched herself onto its back, latching her jaws into the back of its neck, while ripping at it with her claws, biting and pulling with her teeth. Tearing chunks of flesh from the bear's neck and back of its head was thrown clear of it again, dragged off by claws in her legs and smashed into another tree. Got up, shook herself off, snarling and growling with every ounce of bloodlust filling her, shook herself out. The bear was wounded as much as she was now, still willing to fight just like her. Ignoring the pain she was feeling, the wounds to her body. Nothing would stop her. She launched herself with all her wolfen speed and strength, uncaring of her wounded condition, or the physical pain movement now caused her. It was a better feeling than the betrayal of their mate. She dodged the paw all claws out, that tried to smash her, and her claws sliced and ripped into its belly, gutting the beast. It fell down with a mighty roar and then she was tearing into it, ripping away with all she had, gouging the beast open, spilling its innards to the ground around her, biting and tearing with her jaws, not yet ready to give up destroying it. Lucinda! What's going on? They heard his voice come through the mind link. The very man who had lied to her, to them. Cheated them, betrayed them. His voice was so soft and filled with worry and concern. He was a good actor. Had fooled her, fooled them before. Kyra's rage refilled, her head lifted slowly from the destruction, her body now stilled. The bear she was standing in between her and him, a mouth full of innards. Locked her eyes right onto her own mate. A mighty black beast of a wolf, large and impressive. Her rage seethed through her once more. The snarl that ripped out of her was a clear deadly warning, aimed right at him. She spat out the innards and stalked slowly up on top of the bear's dead carcass, a bear she'd just taken down all by herself. Her strength and power would be all on display for his beast to see. She was a full-blown threat and not to be messed with. Stood on top of the bear and stared down at his wolf, at Rip her own mate. Growled menacingly at him, she knew his human could not cheat and lie to them without his knowing about it. Her mate was as much to blame as Lucinda's was. Her mate could have stopped it. She knew she could stop Lucinda and force her way forward to stop her from hurting her mate. So could his. Lucinda, his voice came to her again. Calm down and tell me what's wrong. She didn't want to hear his voice inside her head. Wanted him gone, away from her. You cheating BD, she screamed down the mind link, all her pain and anger for him to hear, to feel. His cheating had not hurt him but it had them, and now he got to feel it all. Lucinda sent it all, her rage and pain right at him, then severed the link with sheer force of will, all her Luna powers in force against him. Severed it hard and brutal, ripped it right from his mind. then retreated to the back of Kyra's mind once more. Whatever Kyra did to them was their own fault. She would not stop it, would not get in the way of her wolf's bloodlust. Saw through Kyra's eyes, he shifted back to human form, backed away very slowly as Kyra stalked him, still snarling. "I don't know what happened," he said out loud, unable to use the mind link on her right now. Not only had Lucinda severed it, she was using all her Luna powers to stop it from being re-established. She did not want his voice in her mind ever again. Kyra snarled at him. "Kyra, calm down. I swear I didn't do anything." She knew what he did, heard it with her own ears. Took another step forward towards him. Watched him as he dropped down onto one knee, hands up, trying to show he didn't want to fight. "Please Kyra, whatever it is, calm down. Give me back Lucinda." The dart that hit her in the neck, made Kyra's head whip around to see where it came from. Brady was already reloading another. She turned and shot off at the new threat. He didn't move, just stood there calmly loading the next dart, which hit Kyra in the shoulder. She fell down but was not out, so filled with adrenaline and bloodlust was she it would take a lot, tried to get back up, snarling at him the whole time. Lucinda felt the first crack of her shifting back to human form, the drugs taking over in Kyra's body. Was left lying naked on the ground, unable to move. Her vision darkened around the edges. Kyra was now gone from her completely. Wolfsbane. They had used Wolfsbane on Kyra to bring her down. Then blessed oblivion and into the darkness she fell, away from all her pain and suffering. The rest of the audiobook will be continued in the next episode. Join us on Patreon for early access or more great audiobooks. A link is provided in the video description.